Hello and welcome to the first ever Knicks Universe podcast. I'm your host, Danny Gardner, and today we're going to be doing a review of the Knicks season and look forward a little bit to what we might see in the coming off season. Just to start off, I would really like to thank the Knicks, as this was the most enjoyable Knicks season that I've ever had in my entire lifetime. I'm 22 years old. I've been a Knicks fan for as long as I can possibly remember. And although the mellow years were fun, the team wasn't quite as likable as this team was. It wasn't that easy to root for. I think the thing that made this year's team so special was how likable they were. I mean, even guys like Randall, Barrett, Bullock, everyone. It was just a bunch of guys who wanted to come into work every day and grind and work hard and play defense and play the right way and play together. And there seemed like a team that really played for each other, which is a really rare thing to see, is a group of guys who really want to come in there and win because they really love each other. And just that entire process, the regular season, watching them night in, night out, it was fun. It was must watch TV. So, first and foremost, thank you to them. Julius Randle specifically, he was awesome. And I know I'm going to get into the Atlanta series a little bit and talk about what possibly went wrong there, but he was amazing this year. He carried the Knicks to 41 wins. He won Most Improved Player and absolutely deserved it. And he's going to get an All NBA team and will deserve that as well because there weren't many guys this season who, the way that they played, could have carried the Knicks the amount of wins that they had, and he played his heart out. He made big shots all season long. And is he a perfect player? Is he a number one? Absolutely not. But we kind of knew that going into the year. Like, he's better than where we thought he would be at this point in the season. That's all you can really ask for. The guy busted his butt. He improved himself. And I look forward to see how he improves himself again in the next season. Now, RJ Barrett is someone else who I really enjoyed watching develop this year. He's the youngest player on the team. He's only 20 years old. And after a disappointing rookie season, that was in part due to his subpar ability to shoot the basketball and also part due to the roster construction that was so poor that didn't allow him to play to his strengths. RJ came into the season ready to go. His shooting percentages across the board went up 41% from three, 75% from the free throw line, and those are both way, way, way up from where they were at last year. So it was very clear the amount of work that RJ Barrett put in to this offseason. And now I look forward to see what he does this coming off season, because if he can improve this much from year one to year two, you would expect to see another similar type of jump from year two to year three. He's so young. He has the right mindset and he works his butt off. So I look forward to seeing where he can improve. And I think there's obviously room for improvement. I think Barrett can tighten up his handle a little bit to give himself some advanced scoring moves to make him better off attacking off the dribble. I think he actually has a pretty natural proficiency for reading the defense well of the pick and roll. So I'd like to see him explore more of that game. Obviously, strengthening his right hand because he really likes to go back to his left, and shooting off the dribble is the last one. I think he really needs to improve his shooting off the dribble game. He proved he can be a viable catch and shooting threat, and I think that those numbers will continue to increase, but I think he needs to improve his ability to shoot off the dribble to make himself more of a threat with the basketball in his hands, because right now his game is pretty much limited to catching and shooting and then driving the basket. And there needs to be some sort of in between there for him to really make himself a more all around proficient scoring threat. I like his defense. I like his passing ability. I like his mentality. I think he's a keeper in the long term. Will he be an all star? Probably not. I don't think he's that type of talent to be an all-star, but I don't think he has to be an all-star. I think he can be a really good quality starter on a winning team, and you need guys like that. I think that's the kind of the thing that gets slept on a lot, is just the guy who's a really good starting basketball player who can put in and he'll be fine. He'll play defense, he'll make some threes, and that's great. You don't need someone who's going to do all that. In fact, I think it's a lot of the time just as important as having stars is having people who don't need the ball in their hands all the time to be effective. If you have guys who move well without the ball, do little things, do the dirty work in your lineup, those are guys who contribute just as much to winning as these great stars will. So looking forward to seeing where he develops from this point on. Our two rookies, Emmanuel Quickly and Obi Toppin, had very, very different paths this season. Obi Toppin was the eighth overall pick. Emmanuel Quickly was what ended up being the 21st overall pick in the draft. And Obi really struggled out the gate. I was not pro Obi. Even when he was drafted, I didn't think the Knicks should have drafted him. I thought he was kind of an awkward fit. I've talked about this before, but he started off even worse than I would have possibly thought. He was got hurt early. He looked uncomfortable. He looked like he had no clue how to play basketball. And at 23 years old, it was really alarming to see someone who's supposed to be a pro ready scorer not be pro ready for anything at this point. He was barely playable. However, towards the end of the season and especially in the playoffs, you started to see him figure it out and figure out what he does well, which is he can knock down some spot up threes and get out and run and be an energy guy and excite the crowd with some dunks. And again, with Obi, it's not going to be like RJ. I don't think. I think RJ has a much higher ceiling than Obi Toppin is. That's not a secret. But I think that with Obi, he can become a quality bench piece, which is important also. Again, is it a great draft pick for the Knicks? Should they have taken Tyrese Halliburton? Yes, they absolutely should have taken Tyrese Halliburton. He would have been a perfect fit for what they have right now. That's beside the point. With Obi, at least you look it looks like you have someone who can be in your rotation, which is better than what we've seen based from our last two lottery picks in KP and Kevin Knox, not including RJ Barrett, of course. Both or not KP, rather Frank Ntilikina and Kevin Knox. Ntilikina, as much as I like his defense, hasn't been consistent has not nearly been consistent enough to warrant being playing time as much as I like his upside. And Kevin Knox is just not a good basketball player. Like it's plain and simple. The guy looks like he has a pretty shot, but I mean, doesn't really do anything. He hasn't advanced past a high volume, low efficiency chucker, basically. And I don't think he's that smart basketball wise. And that's a problem. I think you have to have a good basketball mind in order to be a decent basketball player, and he just doesn't have that. So it's definitely lacking from Kevin Knox's game. Obi Toppin, I think, has the potential to be a good contributing bench piece, which is nice to see. I'm excited to see him develop this offseason. Emmanuel quickly, conversely, was awesome out the gate. And people, I think, got a little overexcited about what he can be. Anyone who thinks that he's going to be a starting point guard and a quality starting point guard at that is not looking at this correctly. I love quickly. He's not that. He's not even a point guard. He's a shooting guard in a point guard's body, a combo guard, whatever you want to call it. He's that. He can score in bunches. He occasionally makes some really nice passes. He plays high energy defense, and he plays the game with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, which I really, really, really love watching, which was kind of a lot of the Knicks this year did that, which is part of what made them so enjoyable to watch. But with quickly specifically, I just think that his ceiling is like a better defensive, versatile version of Lou Williams. I think he's a great elite bench piece, which you absolutely need. And as you could see in the playoffs when Rose was inserted in the starting lineup, they kind of missed what he brought to the second unit. I don't think he's going to be that good as an all-around point guard because that's what Rose is. But I think he can be that type of player for you off the bench in playoff games, which is exactly what you need. You need guys who are going to come in and get buckets and look to be aggressive. It's kind of where the league is headed now, is in a much more offensively oriented direction. It's why guys like Frank can't play, despite how good a defender, how good of a defensive player that he is. If you're on the court now, you need to be able to score. It's that simple. You look at the Hawks, and we'll get in the series a little bit more in a little bit, but you look at the Hawks, they have every single person outside of their centers can score. I mean, Hunter can score. Huerter can score. Obviously, Bogdanovich can score. Obviously, Trae Young can score. John Collins can score. Danilo Gallinari can score. Lou Williams can score. Even Solomon Hill can hit a three in the corner if he's open. I mean, he's starting right now in the Philadelphia series, so he can obviously do some things. But the Knicks all around just don't have enough guys who can score, and that's a problem. And we'll get into the offseason in a little bit. We'll briefly touch on that. I think we'll touch on that a little bit more in a podcast. But I think the biggest thing that we can take away from the regular season specifically is the culture that Tom Thibodeau came in and established. And Thibodeau was a coach who was much maligned at the hiring. I think everyone knew he was a good coach, but they thought the game had kind of passed them by, and it could not be more clear at this moment that that is not the case. Tibbs is a fantastic basketball coach. He's a culture changer. You look at guys like Mike D'Antoni, for example, who has almost won a lot. And I think they kind of have relatively similar coaching resumes in terms of how far they've gotten and where they've gotten their teams to achieve. But D'Antoni is a guy that brings a good team, a talented roster up a level, whereas Thibodeau can come in and build a culture. And I think their ceiling is kind of a similar place, but it's where the Knicks all were as a franchise at the start of the season. They so desperately needed someone to come in and change the culture. David Fizdale might not be a terrible coach, but boy, was he a terrible coach in New York because they had a very similar roster last year and got significantly worse results. And that's clearly what Tibbs does. He gets guys to come in and work hard. And part of that is due to roster construction, is having guys who are built like that, who want to come in and want to work. But part of it is also who the coach is and what they're about. And I think that the steps that the Knicks took as a franchise this year were the biggest thing that we can take away from this regular season. We are no longer a laughingstock. How good we will be depends on the players that we get, depends on how people develop. But we're no longer a laughing stock. And that's a huge step. And that's partially why you saw those scenes outside of Madison Square Garden after game two, where people were making fun of the Knicks for like celebrating too much or winning one playoff game. And it wasn't just the one playoff game. It was the fact that after years and years and years of people who care a lot about this team watching them be an absolute joke, we're no longer a joke. And that's really cool to see. And they're obviously a huge market. Obviously, they're a huge draw with amazing fans. And so we'll see what guys want to come here in the future. And it's not necessarily this year. It could be next year. It could be the year after that. But continuing to build off of the culture that was established is going to be so key for them and how they're going to take the next step moving forward. Now, moving on to the playoffs, the Knicks, for all I talked about how fun they were to watch this year, the lack of talent was very clear, and the lack of talent came back to bite them in this postseason. Atlanta was just far, 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 far more talented than the Knicks were. And the Knicks were also uniquely set up to not being able to stop Trae Young and the Hawks offense because they don't have anyone who can really guard opposing point guards very, very well, especially small, quick ones. But I mean, they just didn't have enough scoring. In your starting lineup going into the series, Peyton, Barrett, Bullock, Randall, Noel / Gibson, they kind of they switched in and out throughout the series because Noel was hurt. But Peyton can't score. Bullock can only have shots created for him off the catch, and Noel similarly needs someone to create shots for him. You can't have that in the playoffs. You look at what Brooklyn's doing right now. Look at what the Clippers are doing right now. Look at what Utah is doing right now. You need scorers. You need guys who can shoot the basketball, who can put it in the basket, who can create their own shot off the dribble, even if it's not necessarily putting three moves on a guy. Maybe it's like attacking closeouts or attacking a mismatch in a pick and roll or something like that. You need guys who are going to do that. And this is where the Knicks' lack of talent really came back to bite them because they couldn't do it. The Knicks' defense, for the most part, even though against Trae Young, it was terrible. Against the Hawks as a whole, the Hawks weren't putting up tons and tons of points. The Knicks just couldn't score. And the Hawks aren't an all-world defensive team. They got a lot better under Nate McMillan, but Trae Young can't guard anybody, and he doesn't really try to guard anybody. And this is where I kind of got frustrated with Thibodeau with that through most of the series, is that when you have a guy like Trae Young on the opposing team, especially when he's killing you on offense, you got to make him work on defense, and he can't guard anyone. And they just were not doing that. You got to do that by forcing switches, using pick and roll, attacking mismatches, putting guys on the floor who make Trae Young guard them, which is why I think having Bullock in the starting lineup a lot of the time when Trae Young kind of matching minutes because you want Bullock to guard him didn't work very well because Bullock is a solid defender. He's not a great defender, and you need to be a great defender if you want to guard Trae Young. And on the offensive side of the ball, he doesn't have a move anywhere. He can do shoot a spot up jumper, shoot coming off the screen, maybe a 1-2 dribble pull up, but he's not putting the moves on anybody. And you need to make Trae Young work. You need to make guys like Trae Young work. And that just didn't happen. And that's partially because Knicks don't have anyone who can really come in and attack and get buckets like that. I mean, Alec Burks, depending on the night, he can do that. Derrick Rose obviously could do that, but they were never going to have Trae Young guard Derrick Rose. Emmanuel Quickley can kind of do it, but his game is more, it doesn't really matter who's guarding Emmanuel quickly for the most part. He's going to take his same shots, and either they are either going to go in or they're not. Um, and I think what it revealed about Bullock specifically is he's a guy who has a role on a team, but he cannot be a starter if you plan to be a winning team. And I don't think, again, similar with the Randall situation, I don't think this was a secret. Like everyone knew going into the playoffs, the Knicks were really under talented. And a guy like Bullock's a perfect example of that, where in the context of the team, he could be a contributing player. But if you're relying on him to get buckets and play really good defense on a consistent basis, you're just not going to win playoff games. It can't happen. And that's not a shot at Bullock. I love Bullock as a personality. I want him back next year in a bench capacity, but that's just not how you're going to win playoff games. And now going on to the big thing was Julius Randle's obviously disastrous performance in the playoffs against the Hawks. And there's no way to really talk around this. He was terrible. And it wasn't just that he wasn't hitting shots. He looked tentative. He looked like he wasn't really sure what was going on. He had some terrible turnovers, especially in game 5. He looked just confused. And I think there's a bunch of things that Randle did wrong this series. And that's not to take away from how great he was during the regular season. But the Hawks were doubling him every time. He knew they were doubling him every time. And he had this really bad habit. And he did this during the regular season too, but it obviously wasn't as frequent. Of he would catch the ball and wait for the double to come, and then he would kind of not do anything. Like he would hold the ball for a while, maybe try to occasionally like split the double or shoot over the double team. But the best thing to do is if you know a double's coming is attack early. And if you know where the double's coming from, if you're already catching the defense off balance by attacking early, you can really force them to rotate in a way that they don't want to rotate and get some really good shots. And if you hit them, you hit them. If you don't, you don't. Obviously, the Knicks during the regular season shot the ball exceptionally well from 3, even though they didn't take that many of them. They were, I believe, third in the league in percentage. In the playoffs, they were terrible. So that definitely hurts when it comes to actually making them score points, but it was a lot due to just how they ran their offense. They weren't getting great looks. And the Hawks did a really good job of confusing Randle, especially Hunter. Hunter did a great job. He's big, he's strong, he's long, and he was able to kind of prevent Randle from doing a lot of the stuff that he wanted to do. And does that mean that you shouldn't extend Randle now? No, you should still do that because you need quality players and he's a quality player. But he cannot be your star. And if you didn't know that going into the playoffs, well, you know that now. Anyone who believed that Randle was going to be a number 1 on a championship team was not watching a lot of basketball. You need someone who's better than him. You need someone who's a better shooter consistently and a lot more, just more perimeter scoring around him. Just how it's got to be. In the offseason now, looking ahead, the Knicks have a ton of free agents this offseason. A lot. Rose is a free agent. Mitchell Robinson's a free agent. Reggie Bullock's a free agent. Nerlens Noel, Taj Gibson, Alec Burks, Frank Ntilikina, Elfrid Payton, all free agents. They should not bring back Elfrid Payton. Just starting that off right now. I don't know why they re-signed him. He's terrible. He can't score. He looked like towards the end of the season, he kind of just like melted down. Like he was bad. Don't get me wrong. He was bad the whole time, but he wasn't this bad as he was down the stretch. He I think had 1 point in the 2 playoff games that he played. He in the regular season, he was playing probably like 20, 25 minutes a game, maybe even a little bit more than that. Down the stretch of the season, he was in there for like 7 minutes in the beginning of each half, and that's it. And because he couldn't play him, the guy wasn't scoring. He was turning the ball over. His defense was at times just dumb, like not playing smart defense. And something personal against Elfrid Payton. The guys seemed to like him a lot, and Tibbs obviously liked him enough to have him start the entire season. But geez, I mean, he was terrible this whole season. He was terrible. I mean, I don't know what you want. Like, I don't know what more he can do to improve his standing to maybe get re-signed, but he should not be back here. I mean, the fans hated him. I actually can't. I said before, I don't think there's ever been a player on a team that has been so loved that is hated so much. Like fans hated him and they loved this team. So it was a kind of weird thing to have a team who everyone loved and their starting point guard was just despised, but he deserved it from a basketball standpoint. He was that bad. He was unplayable. And it really hurt the Knicks in the playoffs because Rose was then forced to start because you couldn't even play Alfred Payton for 7 minutes because of how bad those minutes were. So he should definitely be gone, no question. Moving on to other guys, Derrick Rose, definitely want him back in a backup role. He cannot be a starter; his body won't hold up. But he's such a good player, such a good bench piece, and that was part of the reason why the Knicks were so good. Is their bench was really, really, really good this year. So definitely worth bringing him back next season. Next up is Mitchell Robinson. Now, the Knicks have the opportunity to extend Robinson here, and that's absolutely something that I think that they should do. Why? Do I think Robinson's the best center? No. I think he's fine. But I think he has decently high potential, especially on the defensive end, and you can buy low with him here. If you wait another season and he has a really, really, really good year, you're going to end up having to shell out a lot more money than you would if you just buy low on him here. And if you say you offer him 4 years, $40 million, something like that, you could probably get him to sign that deal. And on top of that, that's a really tradable contract if things aren't going well. 10 million a year is not that bad. And you also avoid the risk of having to pay him a ton of money this next off season if he has a really good season. He proves he can stay healthy because when he was playing, you could see the difference between him and guys like Noel and Gibson when he was not playing. He's just way, 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 way better than they are. And that's not to say that he's the best center, but he's better than them. And it pays to be better than an average backup center. Reggie Bullock is next. I do want him back. Again, similar with Derrick Rose, he can't be a starter. And it's not for his body. He's just not good enough. It's fine. I mean, he's a fine player, but he has to be coming off the bench. He limits you too much offensively in your starting lineup if he's going to be there. And I'm not going to get into the cap specifics of a bunch of these moves because there's a lot of stuff the Knicks would do. I think we're going to do a much more in-depth free off-season thing for the Knicks. But just in terms of guys who I want back, I want to see him back on the team. Noel and Gibson. Realistically, I think you can only bring one of them back, but I would like to see both of them back. I think they provide excellent. They're great backup centers for you. They can both start in a pinch. They both play hard. Noel is fearless blocking shots around the rim, and he put his body on the line a lot. And it's good to have guys like that on the team. It also having that center depth is really important because in the league now it's kind of like guards, it's like ball handlers, wings, and centers. So you need three centers who can play because you want to have injury insurance, and also if guys getting in foul trouble, you want to be able to have that. And so, like, you need to have three centers in your roster. Noel and Gibson. I don't know if you can bring both of them back. Probably not. Would I like to see them both back? Absolutely. Alec Burks. Okay, this may be an unpopular opinion. I've seen enough of Alec Burks. I feel like he's a guy who is solid scoring the basketball, but it's just a matter of if he's hitting his shots, he's great. And if he's not hitting his shots, it's terrible because he will keep shooting all the time. And if he's bricking, it's just terrible for your team. It can kill your offense. And you saw it for stretches during the season. The team really seemed to like him, especially in the fourth quarter, because he can kind of get his own shot and he's a streaky player. So if he gets hot, he can really close the game well. But God, I mean, he takes some terrible shots. And I don't want that I don't want that for my roster. Coming off the bench, I want to know what I'm getting. That's the thing. And with the rest of the guys in the Knicks bench, whether it be Rose, Quickly and Toppin had their rookie inconsistencies. You expect them to smooth those out. But whether it be Rose or Noel or Gibson, you knew what you were getting from them. And also, they did more things than just flat score the basketball. So if they weren't hitting their shots, it didn't kill you. But Burks, man, he just takes bad shots. And if he's not hitting, it's just not, to me, it's not worth it. And I think you're going to have to pay him more than you'd want to pay him anyway. So definitely not. And lastly, but not least, for our free agents is Frank Ntilikina. And this is an interesting one. And I feel bad saying this because I love Frank, but I just think the Frank experiment has run its course. Do I think he can be a contributing player someday on a winning team if he gets put in the right situation? Yes, I can, because anyone who can play defense the way that he plays defense and has shown flashes of being able to shoot the ball the way that he can shoot the ball, there's definitely a place, but I think he just needs to change the scenery. I think if he's going to be successful, it's not going to be here. Trying to use him as a point guard for the past few years, not his rookie year, but the years after that, it was a mistake. I think he was miscast in that role. I think he's a wing who can guard anyone 1 through 4, and he can guard elite ball handlers because of his size and his length. And if he continues to show improvement in the shot, he can score that way. But anyone who thinks that this guy is going to be a starting point guard in a league is not paying attention. He does not attack well off the dribble. He has no advanced scoring moves. His offensive game outside of his shooting really hasn't improved at all. And his confidence in the offensive end kind of comes and goes. And in the NBA, that can't happen. It's kind of a concern I have with Lonzo Ball is his the amount that Frank is engaged in the game and his confidence wavers way too much for me to feel comfortable paying him. Now the Knicks can extend him a qualifying offer and it only costs them $5 million, but I have a hard time believing they're going to want to put $5 million in cap space into a guy who's not going to play at all for them this next year. I do think that the Knicks should extend Randall this offseason. Uh, he's that number 4 for 132 is a solid number for a guy who's going to be basically a borderline all-star for the rest of his career. That's not an untradeable contract, especially the way contracts are going. Plus, if you wait to pay him next offseason, you're going to have to pay him north of $200 million, and you don't want to do that. That could be a terrible contract for the team, not because Randall's not necessarily good enough to get paid like a star, but I'd much rather pay for a star when it costs me 30 million a year as opposed to 40 million a year. Um, Randall obviously really struggled in the playoffs, but I want to see how he improves again this offseason because people like he improved so much from year 1 to year 2, and specifically in the areas that he failed at last year, his first year. So I'm hoping that he makes those same adjustments from year 2 to year 3 and becomes a much more well-rounded player who's better at attacking double teams and better at handling, being more versatile in offense. And I think that he can be that. So it'll be interesting to see what they end up doing with him, but I think that they definitely should re-sign him. Thank you guys for listening. In future episodes, I think we're going to be doing more in depth in terms of free agency as well as the draft. I need to do much more research on the draft before I want to give my opinions on these players. But it was a really fun season. I really enjoyed it. And thanks again.